Chapter 13. She was terrified to stay in the house. She was terrified to leave. Where is he? Calling from the mall? A car? A house right in this neighbourhood? How does he know where I am? Crying, Trish picked up the phone, started to dial, then quickly put it back down again. He'll know if I call someone. He'll hurt Nita and Imogen. Oh God, what'll I do? She thought quickly, slipping into her coat, scarcely even realising what she was doing. She'd slip out the back, sneak through the yard, shortcut between the houses. She'd run down to the corner, to the library. The library would be open now, bright and busy, full of people. He'd never think to look for her there. She'd be safe. She wouldn't be alone. She left the light on and turned up the television. The back port light was already off, so she opened the door just wide enough to squeeze through. The Hansons' backyard was large and overgrown, tangled with shrubbery, closed in with trees. Their garage stood to one side, a storage shed sat at the other end. It would be hard for anyone to see her back there, even the next-door neighbours. Taking a deep breath, she limped across the grass and squeezed through an opening between some leafless hedges and a garage. There were clouds tonight, thick strands tangled around a sickly yellow moon. As she ducked down between the houses and came out onto the next block, she paused for a moment to watch the street. There were no cars in sight. The sidewalks were deserted. Dead leaves rattled across the pavement, stirred into life by a cold, raw wind. Trish pulled her collar around her face and lowered her head. She'd thought it'd be easy, that she'd be able to hurry, but she hadn't counted on the pain. Now, as she tried to quicken her pace, every muscle cried out in protest, and the stitches on her chin felt like they were pulling into themselves. She bit her lip and felt tears brimming in her eyes. I have to go on. I can't stay here. She went on through the darkness, starting at each new sound, keeping a sharp eye on the street beside her. Once more she cut through some neighbours' lawns and sneaked furtively between houses, praying that no one would mistake her for a prowler. When she finally spotted the library up ahead, she fell through the front door with a grateful sob. The light and warmth enveloped her at once, making her weak with relief. She stood for a moment, surveying the huge front room, the desks and shelves, the people quietly strolling back and forth, their nose buried in books. He could be here too, you know. He could be. The thought hit her like a cold fist. She leaned back against a bookshelf and took a deep breath, forcing herself to be calm. Of course he wouldn't be here, she argued with herself. She'd been so careful. She'd gotten away and he'd never think to come here. Still, she couldn't help glancing nervously about as she made her way to one of the smaller rooms. She found an unoccupied desk and sat down, keeping her face hidden within the partition walls. She didn't want to get up and find a book. She couldn't have read it even if she wanted to. She just wanted to sit here and be with people and not think about what was destroying her life. She crossed her arms on the desktop and lowered her head. She closed her eyes and moaned softly. She heard the footsteps coming slowly, very near to her. She heard them stop, right beside her chair. As Trish's eyes flew open, a scream rose in her throat, then locked there, nearly choking her. Well, hi, Storm Reynolds said. Are you following me? All Trish could do was stare. Storm looked down at her and smiled, and then, when she didn't answer, he squatted down on his heels and leaned towards her face. I said, are you following me? He whispered. What are you doing here? Trish mumbled. The same thing you are, probably. Trying to keep warm. Trish kept staring. Her mind felt numb. She couldn't think of anything to say. He's not what he seems to be. Are you studying? She stared down at his empty hands. You don't have any books with you. Excuse me, he said deadpan. I thought this was a public library. I didn't know you owned it. I'm just surprised to see you, that's all. Yeah, same here. I've been worried about you, Storm said seriously. I heard what happened at the mall. His eyes moved slowly over her face. I guess it wasn't an exaggeration. I fell. Trish said stupidly. He gave a slow nod. How are you feeling? She shrugged. She didn't raise her head. Should you really be here, do you think? Shouldn't you be in home, in bed or something, recuperating? Why aren't you at the mall? Trish asked bluntly, and noticed how he hesitated a moment before he spoke. Hey, isn't it okay if I have a night off once in a while? He grinned. Pizza isn't my whole life, despite what you might think. She didn't smile. She turned her head and buried it in her arms. Hey, Storm said softly, touching her shoulder. You're beginning to scare me a little. I think you should go home. No, I can't go home. Why not? I mean, I don't want to go home. There was a long silence. You're not reading. You don't look like you're studying. Let me guess, you're still looking for your friend Nita's gloves. Trish suddenly had a wild desire to laugh. A quick flash suddenly went through her mind, and she saw herself digging through the dumpsters like a frantic bag lady, coming up triumphantly with a green garage bag in one hand and an ice pick in the other. She heard a strange sound and realised she was laughing, only she could feel hot tears streaming down her face. Come on, Storm said quickly, and his arms were beneath her elbows, lifting her firmly from her chair. No, Trish cried softly. No, let me go, I can't. But Storm had a tight hold on her now and was steering her firmly through the library, past checkout desk, out the front doors. No, Trish kept shaking her head, trying to push him away, but he was too strong for her, and she hurt so badly all over. You don't understand, I can't go with you. I don't want to go with you. She felt the night rush past her, and she saw cars and was vaguely aware that they were in a parking lot, and she was being pushed gently into the front seat. No, she begged, please, please. But he was in the car with her now, and the motor was starting, and they were driving away, out onto the street, through the neighbourhoods, onto the main road. Please, Trish sobbed. I have to go back. I don't want to be with you. Thanks a lot, Storm said, smiling uncertainly. It's not that I've never been told that in my lifetime, but never from a girl who hasn't even gone out with me yet. You don't understand. Then tell me, Trish. I can't. She put her hands over her face and tried to choke back her tears. I just can't. You're scaring me. Please let me out. Let you out? Right here? Yes! If I let you out at all, it'll be at your house, okay? No, don't take me home. Trish covered her eyes and looked at him miserably. He was staring straight ahead, one hand loosely on the steering wheel, the other draped across the seat behind her. Hey, he said softly, it's okay if you don't want to go home. Then you don't have to. She felt frantic, trapped. She thought for one moment about jumping out of the car, but then she realised they'd reached the highway and picked up speed. She gulped down her sobs and stared at him. Are you kidnapping me? To her surprise, he chuckled softly, giving her a sidelong glance. Well, don't think I haven't thought about it, but I'm too young to spend the rest of my life in prison. Tired and frustrated, Trish let her head fall back against the seat. She felt his hand drop lightly to her shoulder and settle there. You seem to have a pretty big thing against going home right now, and you sure look like you could use a good friend, he said softly. Trish stared at the windshield, at the thick black sky, at the autumn moon. I feel like I could be a good friend, Storm said. If you were a good friend, you'd have left me in the library, Trish said wearily. Well, okay, he shrugged good-naturedly. I guess you do have enough friends at that. What do you mean? You and your girlfriends, the tight trio. Trish felt an uneasy shiver go through her. How do you know about my friends? She whispered. What do you mean, how do I know? Storm looked surprised. You three are always together. He reached for the dashboard, turning on the defroster. You're lucky. I never had two close friends like that. Not even one close friend. Trish turned her head and looked at him. He stopped for a red light, and his face seemed to grow thoughtful. My folks moved a lot when I was growing up. There was never time for me to make any real friends, any real attachments. And when I did, well... He shrugged, giving a light laugh. It always hurt too much to leave them, so I just stopped with the commitments. Why did you always have to leave? Trish couldn't help asking. My dad was in the military. My mum, for a split second his face darkened. Mum died when I was 8. I'm sorry, Trish murmured. Me too. His smile was forced, sad. She was beautiful. I missed her a lot. Again, that strange dark look. I still do. He moved his foot from the brake to the accelerator. The car shot forward and Trish reached unconsciously for the door handle. It'd be nice to have a place you'd never have to leave. Storm went on and Trish thought he sounded almost wistful. A place where you'd feel. His voice dwindled and he shot her a startled look. Wow, listen to me. Trish gazed at him for a long moment but said nothing. I don't usually go on like this about myself. Storm looked a little embarrassed and Trish shook her head. It's okay. You hungry? You feel like something to eat? She shook her head again. For a long time neither of them said anything. Then finally Storm spoke up. It's kind of a funny thing, how news travels so fast around the mall. You'd be surprised at what everyone hears and knows. Again, Trish felt a strange uneasiness go through her. She glanced at him quickly, then out her window. That escalator you fell down. It was out of order. Storm kept his eyes straight ahead. His hand lay still upon her shoulder. It was an accident, Trish mumbled. It was stupid of me to get on it. The thing is, Storm went on, still not looking at her, I can't figure out why you tried to go on there in the first place. You strike me as being a sensible sort of girl. You must have been in an awful hurry for some reason. Trish stiffened. She lifted one hand slowly and rubbed up the fogged-up glass. It was my fault. I fell, that's all. You must have noticed the sign. She nodded. I told you it was a stupid thing to do. I just wasn't thinking. Or maybe you didn't notice the sign. Maybe something upset you or scared you. His eyes shifted, lingering on her face. You should be more careful. People who aren't careful just end up getting hurt. Trish wrapped her arms around herself and shivered. Cold? Storm asked. I had a fight with my manager, Trish said quickly. I was pretty upset yesterday about that. He nodded. Yeah, I know. I saw the whole thing. You did? His glance was smooth and swift. Sure. I was busy in the back. Take-out orders anyway. His eyes went to the windshield. She's probably not going to be around for much longer. Trish looked at him sharply. Why do you say that? Nobody likes her. She bullies people, and she can't manage worth a damn. The only reason she's been at the mall this long is because her old man owns half the stores there. He doesn't know what to do with her either. She's totally incompetent. How do you know that? I told you, he said quietly. News travels. He coaxed the gas pedal to the floor, and the car flew around a wide curve. Trish caught her breath and put her hand on her throat. But you are going back, aren't you? Storm asked quietly. What? What did you say? To work. You're going back, aren't you? The pain was worse suddenly. In her face, her head throbbing. Aren't you? The car went faster. She felt like she couldn't breathe. Yes, she exclaimed. Yes, I'm going back. Good, he said. The car slowed, sailed, coasted like a gentle wave down the next hill. That's good, Storm said again. God, I love this car. What power. They drove on for several more miles. When Trish felt the car begin to slow down again, she stiffened, instantly alert. What are you doing? I want to show you something. What? Her voice rose and he glanced over her in dismay. Take it easy. You're going to like this. I want to go home. Please, I don't feel good. This will make you feel good, he said quietly. She could see his face in the half-light. He was smiling. Trust me, he murmured and turned the car off onto a side road. Chapter 14. Almost immediately the trees closed in, pressing against the sides of the car, bowing over the roof and shutting out the sky. It was almost like being inside a tunnel, and as Trish stared fearfully out the windshield, the only thing she could see was a tiny stretch of gravel road ahead, illuminated by headlights. Where are we going? She demanded. She could feel her panic rising until she felt like she was going to explode. She angled herself into the corner of the seat, one hand on the door handle, the other where the seatbelt fastened. Storm glanced over at her and frowned. Calm down, will you? I don't share this place with just anybody, you know. This is my special place. Why are you doing this to me? She blurted out. I can't stand this. Instantly, Storm hit the brake, twisting towards her in his seat. In one movement, Trish had the seatbelt off her and the door open. And without even thinking what she was doing, she tried to run. She had no idea where she was going. Still sore from her fall, she struggled through the trees. Branches tore at her face and hair and clawed at her coat. She heard material ripping and was suddenly aware of something warm in her face and neck. She cried out as her hair snagged on a limb and jerked her head backwards. With numb fingers, she tried frantically to untangle herself from the trees. Trish, come back here! She could hear him behind her, gaining every second. He sounded angry, and in her mind she suddenly heard the whisper, that awful, horrible whisper. He's not what he seems to be. Trish! Storm shouted. Where the hell are you? She gave a final tug and tore her hair free, then staggered off again through the woods. She was numb with cold. Everything felt like it was in slow motion. Her legs sank nearly knee-deep in the drifts of dead leaves, and her arms flailed uselessly, trying to keep her balance. Without warning, she slipped into a hole she hadn't seen and pitched forward into the ground. He was on top of her in an instant. Shrieking, Trish struck out, clawing at his face, grabbing for his hair. She could hear him cursing under his breath and panting for air, and then his sudden surge of strength as he pulled her arms above her head, hard against the ground. Stop it, he yelled. Stop it right now. What are you, crazy? Don't hurt me, she screamed. Please let me go. She burst into hysterical tears and felt his hold on her immediately loosen. Through a haze of panic and terror, she saw his face hovering above her, his expression stunned. What is wrong with you? He mumbled. What did you think I was going to do? She couldn't stop crying. Gasping and sobbing, she tried to sit up and felt his arms go around her, pulling her, then holding her against him. Trish, he murmured. Trish, what is it? What's wrong? I please don't do anything to me, she begged. Just please take me back. The silence went on and on. She could feel the roughness of his jacket against her cheek, could smell the soft mustiness of old flannel. When Storm spoke at last, his voice sounded shocked and hurt. Do something to you? Why would you ever think something like that? I would never hurt you, Trish. Do you hear me? How could I ever hurt you? What kind of guy do you think I am anyway? She looked at him then, afraid and confused, not knowing what to think, what to believe. His face looked stony, peering down at her in dismay, his lips pressed tightly together, his eyes suspicious. It was all she could do to keep from screaming again and trying to run, but another part of her wanted to stay here tight against him and believe that nothing horrible or terrifying had ever happened. You can tell me, he said at last, and she could feel her head shaking from side to side mechanically. There's nothing to tell. No, I think there must be. No, she shook her head again. No, there really isn't. I'm just upset. No! Storm faked surprise, his face finally relaxing into a grin. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a handkerchief, blowing it into her nose. Go ahead, blow. Trish did so, then pulled back a little, avoiding his eyes. Everything's been kind of messed up lately. Storm gave a non-committal nod. But it's nothing you can talk about. She shook her head. She didn't know what to say. So how good a friend does a guy have to be before you'll trust him with your life? Storm said quietly, and Trish's head jerked up. Why did you say that? She demanded. Why did you say my life? Whoa! Storm drew back, chuckling, holding her at arm's length. Down, girl, down. I'm sorry if I picked the wrong cliché. If it makes you that defensive, I won't ask you anything about your life, okay? Trish shook her head miserably. I'm just so tired. Okay, we've established the fact that I didn't bring you into the woods to, he cleared his throat suggestively, take advantage of you. His glance was mischievous. And since you've tried to cross-country run and found it too treacherous in the woods, in the dark, and in your condition, Trish could sense a wan smile forming on her lips, yet somehow she didn't feel anything. Storm stood up and gently pulled her to her feet. Now, if you have no further objections, could I please show you what I brought you out here to show you? Trish felt herself nodding. She didn't seem to have any control anymore, over her feet, over her mind. This way, Storm said gently. He put his arm around her shoulder and gently guided her back to the car. He helped her inside and closed the door, then slid in again beside her. They drove for another 10 minutes, Trish staring dully out the window. It didn't matter that she couldn't see into the night. Nothing seemed to be registering much anyway. She was vaguely conscious when the car stopped again and Storm coaxed her out, and then there was a sensation of dead leaves underfoot and the feathery brush of evergreens across her face as she moved through the darkness. Where are we going? It was starting again, that dangerous spark of panic deep inside her. But before she could break free and try to run, Storm stopped abruptly and turned her towards the left. There, he said softly, right over there. Trish looked. Through a break in the trees she could see a small round clearing, and in the very centre the indistinct outline of what might once have been a cabin, now only leaning walls half standing in a shallow puddle of moonlight. What is it? She murmured, and he laughed softly. Use your imagination. It's a house. Well, it used to be a house. Who does it belong to? Now, ghosts. He smiled at her. Come on. She allowed him to take her hand. Slowly he led her out into the clearing until they were standing alongside what was left of a sagging wooden porch. I found this one day when I was out exploring, he explained, his voice almost reverent. I do that, you know. Go out driving and then look for special things no one else has discovered yet. He shrugged. Of course, I know it's only a matter of time before other people show up here, when I do, but till then. He took her hand again and urged her forward, but Trish stopped. Is it safe? Sure, just don't step on the cracks. She smiled then. She followed him up into the wooden platform and in through the open frame of the doorway. There were only 3 walls left. The 4th wall, which gave out onto the back of the house, was entirely gone, leaving in its stead a breathtaking view of a small stretch of field, then the underlying valley, bathed in moonglow. Trish drew her breath in sharply. It's beautiful, really. I thought you'd think so. Like I said, I wouldn't share this with just anyone. Trish walked to the back of the cabin and stared out across the nighttime scene below. Wouldn't it be wonderful to have a house just like this? I think so, Storm agreed. What's your house like? Oh, you know, she shrugged evasively. Just a house. Where do you live? She started to answer, then closed her mouth again. She ran one hand over the rough logs of the wall and said casually, Where do you live? Me? The question seemed to have caught him off guard. He took a moment to think. Across town. Where across town? The, Southbrook area. You live with your parents? I have an apartment. Which apartments? Where? Again there was a long silence. He started to speak, cleared his throat, then tried again. You know, those new ones over there. Oh, Trish nodded. The Southbrook apartments. Yeah, I know them. But this place is so much better, he said quickly. That's why I love to come here. Sometimes I even pretend it's mine. In good shape, that is. I wonder who this place belonged to. Do you know? Well, Storm walked a few steps, folded his arms and leaned gingerly back against a wooden post. I asked around one time. Seems there's a story that goes with the place, or at least that's what folks around here want you to believe. I'd like to hear it. It belonged to a woman. She lived here all alone, and it seemed she wasn't that popular with the neighbours. Not that there were any close by for her to worry about. Trish turned and looked at him, but his face was bathed in shadows. Why? What was wrong with her? Supposedly she was, shall we say, peculiar. A smile warmed his voice and he chuckled softly. Anyway, she had these wild notions that someone was after her, that someone was going to sneak up there to her house during the night and carry her away. Trish's breath caught in her throat. It was hard for her to get the words out. Who? Who was coming for her? Nobody really knew. Some man, she said. She always mentioned a stranger, but she never said his name. Why? Why did she think he was after her? Who knows? Storm's foot scraped at the wooden floorboards, and Trish jumped. Anyway, she hid herself up here and was so scared for so many years that she finally lost her mind. She went insane? Well, that's what the people say. The point is, she just disappeared. Neighbours came up to check on her one day and she was gone, vanished. The door was open and the fire was still smouldering in that fireplace over there. Trish looked towards another wall and saw what remained of a stone hearth. They looked and looked, even sent out search parties, but no one ever found her. Some say she went off and killed herself to get rid of the ghosts once and for all. Storm sighed, and some say... What? Trish whispered. That whoever it is she was so terrified of finally did find her after all that time. Found her and murdered her and hid her body so well that no one ever discovered it. The silence was deep and thick and suffocating. Trish felt her skin crawl and she burrowed deep, deep into her coat. Why are you telling me this? She murmured. Storm sounded surprised. No reason. I just thought you'd be interested in the legend. I'd like to go back now. Trish. In one swift movement he'd crossed the room and was next to her, his hands on her shoulders, his head bent low to her own. Trish, listen to me. I never would have told you if I'd thought it upset you. Come on, it's just an old wives' tale. Nobody really believes in those anymore. She tried to pull away, but he'd only pulled her closer. Please, her voice rose. I just want to get out of here. Not yet. Storm cut her off and suddenly he was kissing her, his arms tight around her, pressing her close, and she could feel his lips, warm and soft, tasting hers, trailing down the side of her neck into the sensitive spot on her shoulders. Stop it! She slapped him hard. Gasping in horror at her own reaction, she watched as he recoiled in surprise and lifted one palm to his stinging cheek. For the briefest moment she thought a look of pure rage darkened his eyes. Then just as quickly it was gone, leaving his face shocked and slightly bewildered. Take me back, she whispered. He stepped away, his mouth set in a tight line. Okay, lady, you got it. The ride back to town was one of stony silence. Trish kept her gaze riveted on the window, on the darkness steaming by as Storm sped the car through the chilling streets. As he suddenly turned onto her street, she faced him in surprise. Where are we going? I thought you wanted to go back. How did you know I live on this street? He sped up again. It was several seconds before he spoke. I didn't know this was your street. I was just taking another way to the library. She was glad when she finally spotted the huge building up ahead. Without another word, she jumped out and slammed the door, then raced inside, hovering in the entryway until she was sure his car had faded from view down the street. I didn't tell him where I lived, did I? Was he really just taking another route to the library? Steeling herself against the cold, she went out on the street again and took her same shortcuts, ducking through yards and between houses. It was possible, she argued with herself, that Storm was telling the truth. It was possible to get to the library by taking her street instead of one of the main roads. Yet something about it just didn't seem quite right. Such a convenience that he'd run into her in the library. I've never noticed him there before tonight. She thought about the house in the woods and shuddered. She had these wild notions that someone was after her. Relieved to reach Nita's block at last, she sneaked into the backyard and up to the porch, letting herself into the kitchen. The house was warm and bright, and with one glance at the clock, she knew someone would be home with her soon. She peeled off her coat and went upstairs to the bedroom. The room was dark. The only light that came in was from the hallway, and Nita's lamp was off between the beds. Trish saw that she'd forgotten to close the curtains before she'd left. Now she went over and reached up to pull them shut, when something out on the street below her made her stop and stare. It was a car. It was parked at the curb directly across the street, and its headlights were off. The spluttering glow from a corner street lamp angled itself down towards the car's roof, throwing a pale golden shimmer across the front seat. As Trish stood there in the darkness, she could see someone moving. Gasping, she drew back behind the curtains and watched as a shadow shifted itself behind the steering wheel and then coaxed the engine to life. Just for the briefest moment she caught a glimpse of that face as it turned quickly into the light, then disappeared back into the shadows. Just for a second she'd seen him, and she knew she'd seen him before. It was Wyatt. Chapter 15. She didn't turn on the light. She pressed back against the wall and shut her eyes and tried to think about what to do. What's he doing out here? Why is he watching this house? She couldn't believe it. It had to be a mistake. I couldn't really see that clearly. There were shadows, so many shadows. It could have been nothing. The car could have been empty, just a trick of the light. Somebody visiting some neighbour, a stranger. She always mentions a stranger, but never said his name. Trish drew her breath in slowly, held it, let it out. She had to look out that window again. She had to convince herself that she hadn't really seen what she thought she'd seen. She stood at the very edge of the window. The open curtains hid her this way, and she'd moved one of them and peeked through. The car was gone. "Trish!" a voice shouted. "Trish, where are you?" "Oh God, Nita!" Trish breathed and nearly jumped out of her skin as the light snapped on behind her. "What are you doing standing here in the dark?" Nita regarded her as if she'd gone temporarily insane. "I wanted to call you, but we were so busy. I never had a chance. Aren't Mum and Dad home yet? How do you feel?" Trish nodded and sat down on the edge of Nita's bed. "I'm better. No, they said they'd be late." "How come you're dressed? I thought you were supposed to stay in bed." Trish shrugged. "I don't know, I just..." "Look at you. Were you in another accident or something?" As Nita came closer and stared at her in disbelief, it suddenly dawned on Trish how she must look after her fight in the woods, after her fight with Storm. She shook her head and tried to think of something to say, but Nita rushed on. "You have all these scratches on your face and your hair, and there's dried blood on your neck, and look at your bandage. Don't tell me you pulled out the stitches." "The stitches are fine," Trish assured her, though she put one hand up gingerly just to make sure. Don't tell your mum, okay? She's been so worried about me. I just had to get out of here for a while and get some fresh air. So I went down the block and this dog started chasing me, and so I cut through one of the neighbours' yards and I fell through some bushes." "Oh, poor Trish," Nita groaned, taking Trish into her arms and hugging her tightly. "Have you ever had a week so awful as this one you're having now?" Trish shook her head and said nothing, and Nita immediately pushed her down the hallway. "Go in the bathroom and clean up. Then get that nightgown on and climb in bed. I'll bring you some cocoa and some of that chocolate cake Mum made yesterday, and then I want you to go right to sleep and..." "Yes, Mother." Trish tried to make a joke, but could hardly bring herself to smile. "Nita?" "Did you see a car outside when you came home? What kind of car?" "I don't know. An old one?" Nita shook her head. "Nope. Why? Are you expecting someone?" She didn't notice that Trish didn't laugh. She hurried downstairs to fix their snacks, and uneasily Trish got ready for bed. They were still sitting up talking when Imogen came home. She stood in a doorway and stared hard at Trish, squinting through her glasses. "I can't say it's the best you've ever looked," she said truthfully. "You missed all the excitement," Nita grinned. "Trish went out and got attacked by a dog." "Anyone I know?" Imogen asked. "And how come you're home so late?" Nita asked, tossing a pillow at her head. "I went to another movie, that film fest they're having at the mall. It's really very enlightening." "Enlightening," Nita nodded at Trish, trying to keep a straight face. "Enlightening, don't you know?" "You should go. Interesting people show up there." "What kind of interesting people?" "Wyatt's been up there," Imogen said, and Nita glanced at her sharply. "You're lying." "I'm not," Imogen declared solemnly. "And since he's turned out to be your new project, maybe you should start hanging out where he hangs out." "What kind of movies was he seeing?" Nita asked curiously. "Horror? Race cars? No, I know. Science fiction." "Wrong," Imogen said smugly. "Old romance classics." Nita's mouth fell open. "Now I know you're lying." "I most certainly am not. He went the whole week the film fest was on. You've got to start learning about men, sister dear. Still, waters often run very, very deep." Trish looked troubled, but managed to keep her thoughts to herself. It couldn't have been Wyatt outside in that car. "Romances?" Nita shook her head in awe. "Who ever would have figured? He looked so So manly? Imogen's tone was matter of fact. I think he looks quite manly and resilient. And he acts so self-sufficient. I like that in a man, don't you? Nita looked uncertain. I'm not sure. I still think he's weird. Well, the feeling's probably mutual. Imogen couldn't hold back a smile. So, does anyone care to join me for a movie this weekend? She glanced over at Trish. Trish, are you nodding off over there? If she's not, she should be, Nita said sternly. We shouldn't be keeping her up when she needs to rest. She took a quick sip of cocoa, then added, Oh, I almost forgot. Trish, Bethany wasn't at work today. Trish looked blank. What? You're kidding. Maybe they fired her, Imogen said dryly. I don't think so. Nita set her cup on the nightstand. I mean, if they did, nobody seemed to know anything about it. See, here's the thing. She was supposed to be there, but she never showed up. That's impossible. Bethany would show up for work even if the world were ending. Trish tried to laugh, but it sounded thin and nervous. Well, something must have happened to her then, Nita said offhandedly, because she sure wasn't there tonight. Some of the kids in the eatery were asking about you, and they said they hoped she never came back. I swear nobody likes that girl. They should just get rid of her. A cold, inexplicable chill snaked its way up Trish's spine. She shivered and hugged her pillow to her chest. Cold? Nita asked. Imogen, turn up the heat, will you? Well, you didn't miss much at school, Imogen said as Trish stared down at her hands in her lap. This was a good week not to go. There's nothing happening. But I'll be there tomorrow, Trish said, and they both looked at her in surprise. You most certainly will not, Nita informed her. Not in your condition. But there's nothing wrong with my condition, Trish said, but her voice was hesitant, her brow furrowed in thought. What was it? She could almost remember something that Storm had said earlier, something about Bethany. I doubt if she'll be there much longer. Trish? Nita waved one hand in front of her friend's face. Hello? Anyone home? I'm sorry, Nita, No school and no work. Yes, work. Trish glanced quickly down to keep Nita and Imogen from reading the alarm in her eyes. I have to go to work. I have to show up at the mall. You don't have any idea how much I have to show up at the mall. Why'd you put yourself through all that? Nita groaned. It would have been okay today because Bethany wasn't there. But what if she's back tomorrow? And what was it? Something else that night in the stockroom? The guard had been talking. She's not nice to you. She makes you unhappy. You can't go, Nita said again. I'm going, Trish told her. You're brain dead, Imogen said bluntly. Good night. Trish, Nita began, but Trish scooted down under her covers and flipped off the lamp. I have to go to work tomorrow, Nita. It's very important. What's more important than your health? Your health, Trish wanted to tell her. All of your health, all of our lives. But instead she said, Good night, Nita, and pulled the blankets up over her head. She lay there for a long, long time, unable to sleep. She kept listening for the sound of a car cruising slowly by in the night. Troubled and restless, she finally got up and stood beside the window, staring mournfully out into the darkness. She could hear Nita breathing deeply and slowly in her bed, lost in the wonderful oblivion of some dream. Trish wondered if she'd ever be able to sleep like that again. She watched the sun rise, and when the alarm went off, she just managed to slide back into bed before Nita woke up. She was glad Nita was so incoherent in the morning. Her friend hardly noticed that Trish was being unusually quiet and unresponsive. Against Mrs. Hanson's better judgment, she insisted on going to school and asked Nita and Imogen to drop her off at the gas station to pick up her car. She promised to meet them in the usual place for lunch, then waved as they went on without her. Her car was parked outside, and after paying and getting her keys, she climbed in and started off. She didn't understand exactly what had been wrong with it. Something electrical, the man had told her, and she made some mental note to tell her mother when she got back from her trip. She rode for several miles, then suddenly realised she'd spent the whole time glancing out the windows and into the rearview mirror. You really are paranoid today, aren't you? You better get a hold of yourself before you have a wreck or something. She glanced down at the seat beside her and saw a cassette lying there. Picking it up, she examined it briefly, then frowned. It didn't have a label, and she couldn't remember what kind of music it was. She stuck it into the tape deck and turned up the volume, hoping it was another of Imogen's classical surprises. She could do with a little soothing right now, but it wasn't music that came blasting from the speakers, filling the car, her head, her heart with sudden terror. You're a naughty girl, Trish, the voice whispered, yet it was so loud, like a shout, a scream in the close confines of her car, and Trish's hand jerked back on the steering wheel as her eyes fastened on the tape deck in unbelieving horror. "Naughty girl," the voice went on, and he was angry with her. She could hear it, she could feel it, as if he were here with her right now, able to see her helplessness and her fear. "I told you not to talk to anyone. I told you not to tell anyone." "But I didn't," she screamed, even though she was alone, even though she knew he couldn't really hear her. Could he? "I didn't tell anyone, I didn't." "You can't have anyone else, Trish. Do you understand? Only me, only me." The voice was hard now, cold and hard and dangerous, and Trish saw the red glow of a stoplight as she drove through it, saw a woman's shocked face as she barely missed hitting the car. "Stop it!" she shrieked. "Stop it! Why are you doing this to me?" "Only me, Trish." And he was mumbling now, rambling as if his thoughts had suddenly gone out of control. "No one else, do you hear me? No one else. There can't be. I tried to tell you that before. I tried to make you see. No one ever." He paused then, as if trying to get himself under control. When at last he spoke, his voice was honey-sweet. "Well, I did try to warn you, didn't I? But you wouldn't listen. So now I have to show you how serious I am." "No, no." "You'd better be at the mall today, Trish. Do you hear me? You'd better be at the mall." "But why? Why are you?" "I'm the one you belong to. Do you understand? I'm the one who loves you. We're destined, you and I. We're meant to be together, Trish, and no one else can have you." She felt a jolt as her car ran up onto the curb. She slammed on the brake and put her hands over her face, shaking uncontrollably, hunching down in the seat, knowing that no matter where she was, where she ran, she couldn't hide from him. "You're mine, Trish," he whispered lovingly. "And tonight we'll finally be together forever." Chapter 16. She thought she was losing her mind. For several minutes Trish just sat there in her car, rolling back and forth, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. "What am I going to do? I have to tell someone, I have to, but I can't. He'll find out, he'll hurt my friends. What did he mean he's going to show me how serious he is? What's he going to do now?" She was scarcely even aware when she turned the car back onto the street, when she picked up speed, when she turned in the direction away from school and sped across town. Southbrook. That's where he said he lived, didn't he? The apartments in Southbrook. Storm. She didn't know why she was thinking of him now. Last night she couldn't wait to get away from him, and yet she'd never felt so desperate. She'd never felt so utterly alone, and in her panic all she could think about was getting away, far, far away from that horrible voice that would never find her. She would go to Storm's apartment, but she wouldn't go in. She wouldn't even knock on his door. She'd just sit outside in the car for a while, just wait until she'd calmed down, and then just knowing that someone else was nearby, inside the building, would make her feel better. Why am I doing this? I don't know why I'm doing this. She wasn't thinking straight, and she wasn't sure what she was doing anymore. As she screeched to a halt outside Southbrook apartment building, she jumped out of her car and ran through the front entrance, stopping at the mailboxes in the hall, frantically scanning the names posted above them. There were 6 names there. None of them were Storm's. Bewildered, Trish went over to them again, slowly, one by one. She sagged back against the wall and forced herself to take a deep, steadying breath. Why did I come here anyway? Ethan probably knows I came here. He's probably outside watching me right now, following me wherever I go. And now Storm's in danger too, and it's all my fault. She couldn't believe she'd been so stupid, so careless. She started to cry, then stopped herself at once, hurrying back outside, getting in her car. She didn't know where to go, where to run. School was out of the question. She'd be worthless there. She couldn't go home. Ethan knew where she lived. She didn't want to go to the mall, but she knew she'd have to go back sometime. And maybe if she went now, it would appease him somehow. Appease him for her making a stupid mistake in coming here to Storm's, and then he would leave everyone alone. She was so sure she was being followed. More than once she took a sudden turn off and cut through a little travelled side street, and she would swear that the car was tailing her, far behind her in the distance. She wondered if her car was bugged. She wondered if someone was hiding in her trunk. She even pulled off the road once to look, then squatted down to check underneath the car in case Ethan had managed somehow to hide himself up between the wheels. I'm totally losing it. She drove to the mall. She parked her car in the employee lot and walked through the main entrance and straight up to the eatery. None of the stores were open yet, but the food stands were already beginning their preparations for the day. Trish recognised a few of the people working the day shift, but Bethany wasn't among them. She checked out Pizza Park, but Storm didn't seem to be working. She was surprised to see Wyatt cleaning off tables, and for a few moments she just stood there and stared at him. He must have sensed someone watching him. It wasn't long before he looked up and met her eyes straight on. Trish steeled herself and walked over. "Hi," she said. He gave a nod and grunted. "I didn't know you worked the day shift." "Sometimes," he shrugged. "I'm filling in for a buddy of mine." "You know, it's kind of funny," Trish went on, plunging right in. "Last night I thought I saw you." Wyatt scratched the side of his head. "Where was I?" "Outside my friend's house." Wyatt's face never changed expression. He shrugged again and flicked his rag over the tabletop. "Yeah? Weird." "It was weird. He really looked like you." "Wow, two of us. Can the world stand it?" "Was it you?" she asked bluntly. Wyatt leaned over and moved a chair. He wrung out his rag and wiped again in slow, wide circles. "Probably not. What was I doing?" "Sitting in a car." "Then I guess it wasn't me." Wyatt looked uninterested. "My car got stolen, remember?" Trish stared at him. His eyes slid away, lingered on a spot of spilt ketchup. Slowly he reached down, wiped it up in one quick smear, then just as slowly turned his attention back to her again. "That must have been some accident you had." Trish frowned. "How did you know about my accident?" "Everyone knows about that." He started to move off, then glanced at her over his shoulder. "If I were you," he said, his eyes narrowing, "next time I'd take the stairs." Trish brought a cup of coffee and sat down at a table. When the doors of the mall finally opened at 10, the place filled rapidly with Friday shoppers and the sidewalk sale officially began. "How strange that I'm sitting here surrounded by all these people, and I'm in more danger than I've ever been before." She didn't know what she was supposed to do. Wait to hear from Ethan again? Wait until something happened to one of her friends? Remembering the voice on the tape made Trish shudder. It hadn't sounded like a warning this time. He was dead serious. Why did I bother to go to Storm's apartment? Especially after Ethan told me not to talk to anyone. I don't know what I was thinking. Ethan probably saw me. Maybe Storm isn't here because Ethan did something to him. A surge of panic came up in her throat. Swallowing hard, she tried to choke it back down, gripping her chair with both hands. Why wasn't Storm's name on the mailboxes? He must have been confused about the apartments. I must have gone to the wrong place. Maybe someone else will be in danger now because Ethan thinks I talked to someone in the building. She couldn't even stand to think about that possibility. She leaned over the table and cradled her head in her arms. And what about Wyatt? He said he didn't even have a car, so that couldn't have been him outside Nita's house last night. Why did I think it was him? I hardly even know the guy. Nita's right. He is strange. What could he possibly have to do with me anyway? Trish forced herself to get up and walk. She went entirely through the first level of the mall, and then went up to the second, and then the third. It seemed like every shopper was watching her. She felt hidden eyes peering out from each doorway, from behind every display window. Even the mannequins looked too frighteningly lifelike. He could be anywhere. He could be anyone. As the morning wore on into afternoon, it was obvious that things were as normal as they could be. She saw employees she knew, and she saw the elderly security guard trying to comfort a lost child. She even spotted Roger talking to the girl at the information booth. She was still embarrassed by her earlier confrontation with him, but he didn't seem to notice her, so she walked on. By 3, she was exhausted. She tried to convince herself that this is what Ethan had in mind all along. Not really hurting anyone, but making her suffer the apprehension of wondering if he would hurt anyone. She knew Nita and Imogen would get there soon, and she spent the rest of the time trying to concoct a believable story as to why she hadn't gone to school this morning after all. She didn't want to face them right now. She just wanted to be left alone. She went back to Muffin Mania and slipped into her apron and began doing some work in the back. But Bethany still hadn't showed up. There was no doubt that the other kids who worked there were delighted at their manager's absence. Trish couldn't remember when the atmosphere had been as fun and relaxed since she started her job. She wasn't surprised when Nita came by before going upstairs. She made up some story about going back to her house and resting that morning, and the lie seemed to satisfy Nita. "But you still look terrible," Nita scolded her. "Promise me you'll stay over tonight and really get some rest." Yes, I promise." "Oh, and here's your flashlight. I keep forgetting to give it back to you." "I thought you want to keep it. You handled it so well when Wyatt tried to attack us in the parking lot." "Very funny. I don't know why you bother with it anyway. The light's so bad." "Well," Trish shrugged, "it's better than nothing, I guess. And speaking of Wyatt, I've decided to revise my attack plan. I'm going to be so irresistible to him that he'll be eating right out of my hand. Maybe you should start with him washing his jacket." "You're right, he is quirky. I like that." "And slippery," Trish wanted to say. Like you never quite know if you should believe him or not. They promised to have dinner together, and Trish breathed a sigh of relief when her friend went upstairs to work. The eatery was exceptionally busy that afternoon, and as the hours wore on into the evening, Trish was relieved to have her hands full, with no time to think on other things. Once she glanced up from making change and thought she saw Storm over in the pizza stand, but when she looked up again he wasn't there. She looked briefly around the snack area for Wyatt, but he seemed to have disappeared. The endlessly long line of hungry customers was just beginning to wind down when one of the other workers called Trish into the back. "You got a phone call," the girl said, looking slightly puzzled, as Trish reached over to pick up the receiver. "No, I mean, they already hung up." Nita, Trish thought instantly. Nita was probably going to be late for her dinner break and didn't want Trish to wait for her. What did they want? "Well," the girl frowned. "She said she was a friend of yours, but I could hardly hear her. She sounded like she had a terrible cold." Trish stared at the phone, not saying anything. "I told you were right here, but she just hung up before I could get you," the girl complained. "That's okay," Trish mumbled. "Did she say a name? Do you remember? Was it Nita?" The girl thought for a moment, then shook her head. "No, it didn't sound like Nita. It sounded like Emmeline? Imogen," Trish whispered. "Oh, no." "Imogen?" the girl said out loud. "Well, maybe, like I said." "What else did she say?" The girl shrugged, looking a little ashamed. "Something about, I don't know, a matter of life or death? I mean, she tried to call you, but—" "Where is she?" Trish broke in, but the girl was going on, trying to explain. "And there might have been more, but I couldn't make out everything she was saying. She sounded so hoarse. She could hardly whisper. Her voice was real deep and low, and—" "Life and death," Trish echoed. She was rigid now, stiff and staring and clenching her fists and trying not to fall apart right there in the hot, stuffy little room. "And she said for you to hurry." "Where?" Trish demanded. "Where is she?" "I don't know." The girl shrugged apologetically and shook her head. "She didn't say where. She just said—" The girl closed her eyes, thinking hard. "She just said, tell her to come now, before it's too late."